Hi, I'm Janice Landsfeld, Product Manager for SonTek's FlowTracker2. In this instructional video, we'll go over how to download data from your FlowTracker instrument and then how to look at some of that data in the FlowTracker2 software. Now that I'm back in the office after making a FlowTracker measurement, I'm going to download the data to my computer or my organization's network. And hopefully you've gotten a good look at the data in the field on the FlowTracker's color screen. And now we're just going to download that file. So the first thing you want to make sure is that your FlowTracker is turned on, which I have. And then we're going to scroll down or click number 3 for the communication option. And then the FlowTracker gives us a prompt. Do you want to connect via the USB cable or do you want to connect via Bluetooth? We'll go over both, but first I'll show you how to do the USB connection. First connect the USB cable to the FlowTracker, which is a micro USB. And then connect the other USB end to your computer. And then when you open the FlowTracker screen, you'll see just a few menu buttons across the top. And click on the device menu button. You'll be prompted, do you want to connect via USB or Bluetooth? I will click on USB. And then very quickly it will connect and tell you whether you've established communications, which I have. And then immediately you'll see a list of all the data files that are on the FlowTracker. So you can either click on all of them or click on some of them. I'll click on this one and then hit the download button. There's a few questions that the FlowTracker software will ask you, such as where do you want these files to go? Do you want to use the same file convention that's being used in the handheld? Just some things like that. You can keep it the same. Hit OK. And the download is complete. Now I'm going to disconnect from the USB connection and show us how to connect via Bluetooth. All right, now I'm back to the FlowTracker home screen. I'm going to click on the device button. And instead of USB, I'm going to click on Bluetooth. And when you're connecting via Bluetooth, you need to make sure that the software is looking for the right serial number for the probe. And if you've hit the communication option on the FlowTracker handheld, it will give you its serial number on the screen. So I'm going to read that off the screen and type that into the software right now. That's FT2H and then the number. And then click the connect button. Success. So now the handheld is connected to my computer via Bluetooth, and then we can go through the same process. Click on the file that we want to download, click the download button, make sure we know where it's being saved and hit OK. If the download's complete, we can disconnect. Now that we know how to download data from the instrument to our computer, let's go over some basics of the FlowTracker2 software. Once I have the FlowTracker2 software open, again, I see the main screen. And I think the menu buttons are fairly easy to understand, but let's just go through real quickly and define them. First one on the left is the View Data button. We'll click on that in a minute to open the data files that we've downloaded. Next is the Device button, which is used to connect to a FlowTracker device, either for downloading data or uploading or downloading template files. The next button is the Export button, if you want to export your data in a CSV or text file format. The next button is an optional feature called the Lab ADV, which enables you to use just the FlowTracker probe in a fast sampling manner without the handheld, probably more for research applications or special projects, but that's optional. Moving over to the right, the settings button just shows you some basic settings for the software. For example, what language you want to use, what units do you want the data to show up in, English or metric. And then finally, you can customize the final PDF report to some degree and upload your own organization's logo if you want. So there are some software settings for that too. The next button over is probably one you may or may not use. If you have FlowTracker1, in other words, original FlowTracker instrument files, and you want to read them and take advantage of the extra power that the FlowTracker2 software offers, you can do that. You can also create your own language files, import existing language files, and then, as I mentioned, there's ways to create discharge file or general file templates, so you can sort of enter a lot of that basic information in about the operator and the site before you get there. Just saves you some time. And then lastly, we have the manual and the software information buttons. And that's it. Those are the basic functions of the FlowTracker software. And so let's go back and open a data file. I'm going to click on the View Data button and navigate to where my FlowTracker file is. Let's open it. And here's the data on the main data review screen. If you want to add more files, just click on this tab right here to open new files. And you can open multiple files and have them up at the same time. Now let's just take a tour of the different things you can see on the data review screen. The first box here on the left is just basic text information about your measurement. So, what is the file name? What are the discharge results? Even some QC parameters, like how many stations do you have? Do you have ideally 25? What was your averaging interval? What is your uncertainty for this measurement? You can't change anything in this box on the left. It's just a summary of the measurement. Now, if you're done looking at that and you don't need to see it for now, you can hit these little arrows in the upper right-hand corner of that box, and it'll hide that for now. So I'm going to do that just to make more room on my screen. Next, let's go over to the far right-hand corner of the screen and look at the settings. So these are settings for quality control parameters that are applied to your data, and then some processing parameters like water salinity and temperature. These things can affect the discharge number, so just be aware when you're changing these. If you want them to be saved, you go up here and either hit the recalculate button, save button, or revert button if you've made some changes but you want to go back to a previously saved series of settings. Or at the end of the day, if you don't like anything you've done, you just want to revert back to the field settings, don't worry, you can always do that. Your original field settings will always be saved. That's good. I'm going to close that one for now. So here we are. We have in the middle here the main data review screen, and we show a lot of data in the FlowTracker2 software. Now, depending on what kind of data you want to see, just select the tab from the ones you see here at the top. I'll start and just go through the tabs with you. So at a glance, the section tab does exactly that. It shows each of our sections that we made during the measurement, again, hopefully 25 or more. And it shows us what the velocities were, what the velocity angles were. You'll notice if any of our measurements did not meet the 5% in any one station or 5% in any one vertical requirement. It's color-coded for you, so you can, again, see at a glance if there's a problem to hone in on and maybe check that data out in more detail. In the velocity chart, depending on whether it was just a single-point measurement or a two-point measurement, we show you the normalized velocity, in other words, just the velocity that was perpendicular to the tagline that's used in the discharge calculation. And then we also show you the velocity, including the flow angle, that was real in the stream at the time. There'll be two arrows if you had a two-point measurement. And then lastly, down here at the bottom, well, we just show what all of your depths were and if you had a 1-point, 2-point, or 3-point measurement for each of those verticals. All right, next let's see what's under the Stations tab. Now this gives you a lot of information all in one tab. And what you can see is that there's information that's probably going to be top in your mind, which is what were the velocities that were taken during this 40-second, 60-second, 80-second measurement. And also, what were the SNRs? Was my signal strength adequate throughout this 40-second, 60-second, 80-second, whatever your averaging time was. So again, just what's nice about the software is very graphical. At a glance, you can see if there were any outliers, if there were spikes, if your SNR was varying, which might indicate a problem or maybe a quality judgment you can make about that measurement. If we scroll down a little bit, we can see that we have access to every single station, every single vertical that was made during this measurement. And we can click on it and see the graphs change at the top and just, again, visually review the time series of the velocities and the SNR during this measurement. What's new about the FlowTracker2 software, and also very powerful, is that we can hit this edit button and we can edit a lot of things. So if there were errors at the time in depth, for example, or location of the tagline, I think we've all done it at some point in time, just keyed something in wrong and it needs changing. Well, you don't have to export this and recalculate it by hand. Just change it here and hit the accept button, or the cancel button in this case, because I didn't change anything. And if you need to, one by one, go through these measurements. You can also scroll farther to the right and scan if there are any quality control warnings for any of these measurements. And if any of them seem unreasonable to you, again, maybe zone in on those and look more closely at the data. I'll show you a little bit more about that in the next tab. But let's just take a look here. For example, I have some standard error warnings. I guess I should also say that it's not unusual to see QC warnings. In fact, if you go through a measurement and don't see any QC warnings, I would actually be concerned about that. Maybe you do have a textbook situation, but most of the time, water doesn't behave like a textbook, so you might have some eddying, for example, so you might have some standard error. It doesn't mean there's cause for alarm or that it's a bad measurement. It simply means there was turbulence or there were eddies that contributed to a larger standard error for this measurement. So the important thing is that if you see a warning, you just assess whether it makes sense or not. And you can discuss it, maybe some notes in your reporting or not. So finally, down here at the bottom of this tab, what's nice about the FlowTracker2 is that we show you this automatic beam check that's taken at the beginning of every station, of every vertical. And it shows us the health or the strength of each of the beams during the measurement. And in this case, my beam check looks great, adequate signal strength, adequate peak shape and peak location. So the instrument was operating as it should during this measurement, during this point measurement. All right, so next I'm going to click on the Samples tab, and here's where you really can look at the data in detail in time series over your 40 or 60 second measurement. And here on the left-hand side, as many stations as you have, as many point measurements as you made, you have the option to click on any one of them and see the time series of a full 40, 60, or in this case, 80-second measurement. So I can see my velocities and the range over which they were appearing, and yet that average, the dark line in the middle, is the average of those velocities. I can see what my signal strengths were. I can see what the temperature was during the course of this measurement, the sound speed, which was dependent on the temperature, and the salinity if you've entered it, the battery voltage, and the pitch and the roll, which is required of the operator to monitor during the measurement. So, you know, if you weren't paying attention, maybe your pitch and roll values will show that. All right, the next set of tabs, starting with the Area tab, is not going to go into second by second level detail. It's going to show us information per vertical. So just basic things like on the Area tab, what was the cross-sectional area of that vertical? What was the width at that measurement? And what was the velocity angle experienced in that station, in that vertical? Similarly, on the Sensors tab, we can see for that vertical what was the temperature, the average temperature, the tilt, and the battery voltage during the time of that vertical. And then again, another unique and nice feature about the FlowTracker2 is that for each vertical, as you're going along in the field, you can enter in a gauge height at any time, and you can even type in comments per vertical. So when you click on the Supplemental Data tab, you can see a list of those if they were made. The next tab is Diagnostics. So per vertical, what was our average SNR? How many spikes did we have during this vertical measurement? What was the standard error, vertical by vertical? And how many samples did we collect? So finally, the last tab is our Discharge Summary tab. You can just scroll through there. It just lists all of our stations in tabular format, shows us how many of those stations had quality control warnings. And if we had made any edits to this data file earlier, those edits will be shown in the bottom. There's a box here at the bottom that will list those. So if you and then perhaps a reviewer of this file down the line wants to know if anything was changed and why, they can see that. And if you're happy with this data file and the measurement summary looks good to you, there's a button here where we can click and save the PDF. And again, if you want to put a company logo in there, it will show up here at the top of your report. And that's it. Your report is here and ready to be submitted.